Welcome back to another video, and in today's design session I'm going to walk you through how to animate an entire UI animation flow in After Effects. I'm going to take you through my process and sharing a lot of techniques along the way. So without any further ado, let's get ready and get started. So here's the entire flow. It starts by fading in from black, revealing the forest. You got titling and content going in between some of the trees. You got the menu in the bottom consisting of cards. You decide to tap one of them, history. That will then morph and transform this card into a full screen view, and that's going to be the second page. So the first thing we're going to do now is to add in all our assets and organize our file system in the project. Let's start also by adding in the background and the wood photo into its own composition by dragging it down to an icon. Now we drag that onto the composition. We're going to match this to the background itself, the reference photo. And a simple trick to match this is to lower the opacity, and then you basically match the texture of the background. And then when you've done that, then it's time to pre-compose the tree details that we're going to put above this to create this parallax effect with the title coming in. So we see two of them right here. I also add in folders here to stay organized, will be very helpful in the end. And I'm adding in all these pre-compositions in that folder to keep it nice and tidy. Now we want to drag down these two tree detail compositions into the main composition to create this scene. Same thing as the background, drag it on and then try to place it on the right texture. Could take some detailing here, but it's pretty straightforward. Once you've done one of them, you just move over to the next one. So we're done with that, and then now we are going to add in the rest of the assets. So we go in here in my sketch file to the design, reading some sizes of the actual text. I'm gonna go back to After Effects and now add in that title as a text layer. So choosing the font, the sizing, changing the color from black to white, and then basically trying to match this to the reference photo in the background. And then I duplicate this text layer and I change this to the second line of word woods, and same deal here. And then when this is done, I now want to place these text layers in different alignments so they are under or above the tree details compositions. So as you can see, when I move it around, I want to see the text hiding behind some of the trees and also visible above some other ones. So now it's time to add in the rest of the elements. I'm adding in the CTA button. I'm also adding in the short paragraph text that goes under the title. Also here turning off the background image to see where I'm working at and trying to match it, just like the previous elements. And then I'm adding in a bottom overlay to give some better contrast, especially when I'm going to add in these navigation cards later on. And then I use my plugin Motion 2 there. You can see I'm playing around with alignments and anchor points. So it's a really good tool to control. And also you can see that I use the align tool to put it in any of the direction of the composition instead of dragging manually. So now we're going to animate these elements between the tree lines. So select all of the layers in the layer panel. Click P to bring up the position attribute. Click the timestamp to add keyframes, and now we're going to move them right to where we want it to start. Then you move to the right in the timeline to decide where you want it to end. And I believe this is about a second. Click the keyframe icon to add it, and now we're gonna select the first keyframe row and move these down and say that it's gonna start from the bottom and it's gonna go upwards. So now I'm previewing this and see how it looks, and as you can see, it's very slow, and we need to adjust the duration later on to make this more rapid. But first, let's focus on how we want this to animate in. So I'm delaying some of these layers one by one to make them appear at different times. So now we're going to work on the most essential thing when it comes to animation, and that is the easings and the curve. So let's select all the keyframes here, and we go up to the plugin Motion 2 that I use, a very popular one that makes this easier. It's basically adjusting the easing curves of how things move over time. And as you can see here, I can just move these sliders up here to adjust how things move. So I'm trying some different options here, but I'm going to end up choosing one that is fast in the beginning and then it slows down over a longer time in the end. So it's kind of gliding and smooth in the end there. So as you can see, that looks pretty good. Now I'm just showing you how you can adjust this live. Repeatedly, you change these sliders in the top and you can see them appearing in different easing curves and different styling. And the possibilities are really endless here to whatever you want. And I'm usually have like a system of numbers that I usually use, so I don't really have hundreds of different easings, and you're gonna know these by heart when you've done it a few times. So now I'm decreasing the distance of these keyframes now, so now they move over 1 second instead of 2. And now I also want to animate the opacity, so let's go into each of these layers, click on the opacity layer or T on the keyboard, and then you create a keyframe in the beginning of the end, and it will go from 0 to 100% opacity. So when these now are added, we can select them, copy them, and then go to each of the other layers beginning and paste the same keyframe in to also fade them in from 0 to 100%. So there we go, now all of these are fading and moving in from the bottom and upwards, one by one. Now we're going to animate the navigation and the cards in the bottom. So go into the project assets folder, drag them onto the main composition, and now we're going to match these to the reference position. So as you can see here, I'm only moving the first and the last card because we're going to use the alignment function to evenly distribute these cards in between the position. So you do this by selecting all the layers, and then you go up here and you click distribute layers horizontally. Now you see they are aligned to all the cards. Now we're going to animate this navigation coming in from the right to the left. We're going to use this by using a null object, and that is basically an invisible layer that have all the properties as a visible layer, and it can be parent to any other layer in the composition. So basically you can add any effects on this layer and it will affect everything that is linked to this null object. So let's add this now by going to layer, new, and then you select null object. So now you see this red square, that's your null object. You can position this null object anywhere you want, but what I'm usually do is to place it above and around the content that I'm animating. This way I will understand what is what. Once you got it to a good position, let's go in and rename this layer to something that makes sense. I'm using nav movement. And now let's parent these to the null object. So select all of the layers. You go into this swirl or quick whip as it's called and drag it onto the null object. And now we're going to find the right timing on when this navigation should appear. So I'm dragging through the timeline here to find a good spot. and I believe it's going to be somewhere in the end of these other content. So I go up in the null object, I click on the position, P on your keyboard, and then place out 2 keyframes. I'll go to the start of this and I move everything to the right. I'm dragging on the null object. So now when we try to play this back, let's see how it looks. It looks good, but it's very static and linear. No real easing going on here, but the timing feels pretty good. Now select all the keyframes again and we go up to the Motion 2 plugin and we just click on the left icon there to copy the same curve. As you can see, it's the same as before. And that's basically how I used to do it. It's you don't need to do many different easings. You basically reusing old ones and reversing them at times as well. That looks pretty good, and the powerful thing about this null object now is that I can still move these individually, but also move them collectively. Now we're going to create the second part of this flow, and that's animating the history card into a full screen view. So let's drag in the other screen history onto the composition. And now we're going to start by scaling this down from the full screen to a smaller size to match the card in the navigation. So let's go into the timeline. We go and press S on your keyboard to bring up scale attribute. Put a scale keyframe there and also move it forward a couple of frames to put the end keyframe. We also want to put in position keyframes, so go into P on your keyboard and do the same to match these. So now we have keyframes for both of these, and we'll start by scaling down the first one to the size matching the navigation card. And then we also move it down and try to place in the same location, aligning it to the bottom. Now let's see how this looks like. I'm adjusting, as you can see, the work area by using B and N on your keyboard. Let's play and see how it looks like and when we want this to be scaling up in full screen. So as you can see, it's not right there yet, and we need to adjust when the frame is ending. So let's drag that down to match the composition. We can also use the align tool here to align it to the bottom, so you don't need to do that manually. And then we also go in here and adjusting the duration, and we want to add in an interstitial moment. We want this to scale up a little bit, moving into the center, pause for a short period of time, and then continue to scale up to the full screen. So now we move this and position it where we want it to be pausing, and also adjusting some scaling until we feel it's right. And then after that, we want to take additional steps in the timeline and adjust how long this is going to pause for. And then we want to drag this into the center of the left and right in positions. And then let's play that back and see how it looks like. And as you can see, they do some weird bounce going on. And that is basically because when you move things, they automatically add in some curves, as you can see. So we want to use the pen tool to adjust these to be straight or no curves at all. There's still some bounce movement, so one way to eliminate this is to right click on the first stopping keyframes, go in and toggle hold keyframe. So that will basically freeze the movement of that keyframe. Then it will continue on the next keyframes and that bounce will be gone. And now we're selecting the first 2 keyframes to adjust the easings here. And when we've done that, we're going to do the same thing, and in this case it's going to be the opposite easing, so it goes in pretty slow, pausing even slower, and then we want this to continue in the same speed and then move up from there. And that way you will get a smooth curve that doesn't do any rapid change in speed. That looks pretty good, but as you can see, the card is still too tall in the beginning. So let's go into layer, mask, and new mask. And now we're going to adjust the height, going from a small to large size. So let's find when we want this to happen by scrubbing through the timeline. Then we go into mask, mask path, adding our keyframes here and adjusting what is happening on the first frame. So we're selecting the top left and right points in this mask and move it downwards to where it matches the card height. And then we can play this back and see how this looks like. And now we see that cards is growing and then it goes into full width. But instead of this growing from the very beginning, I think it would look better if it actually did a pause. Same here, adjusting some durations. And then going up to motion 2 to paste in the same previous easings. So let's see how that looks like. And it's pretty nice. Scales up, moves, and expands in the mask. And now let's go up to layer, new, and select solid. And this is basically going to add a layer that is full black. And we're going to place this under these navigation cards and fade this in as the card is growing up. This will shift the focus from the background to the card. Just some final tweaks here with the easings, and this is basically it. Now we're gonna see this move in and out seamlessly from a small card to a larger card with the background fading away. So now when we have this flow completed, we now want to tweak the content that goes inside of this history page. So just as we did in the beginning, let's drag on all the assets we have for this page and match it to the bottom reference layer. Now I'm also color coding some layers here to just stay organized. Let's start by selecting the portrait photo and animating this going from the bottom and upwards. Then we're adding the easings as before. Now let's see how this looks like. And it looks pretty nice and smooth. So now let's go back to the main composition again, and when we turn this layer on and off, we'll notice that the title history is not yet in our composition. So that's something we need to add in as a layer. So let's select the text tool, tap into the composition and write out the word history. Change the color here to appropriate black, and then we're going to shrink it down to the appropriate size and match it to the reference image. So now we got a pretty good alignment there, and we want to go back to the composition to animate the text going from the bottom and up in position, and also in opacity, fading it out from 100% to 0. And then we select all the keyframes to apply our easings. And now it's time to focus on the other title. It started in 1890. We want this one to follow the same upward movement, but fading in from 0% to 100. So we're adding keyframe for all these and go to the first ones. And we move it down slightly, similarly in distance to the previous one, and then move it down to 0% and adding our easings again. And now let's play this back and see how this looks like. Fades in and it's a little jagged there, and definitely needs some more tweaking. Trying here to switch the easings to the opposite and see how that feels like. And I'm also tweaking this to go slightly slower. Feels a little better, but it's still some pause going on in the middle here, but definitely better than before. Here you see a fast forward of me just tweaking these keyframes back and forth, the duration and position to make that feel just right when it comes to everything coming together here with a lot of movements and effects. Now we have the small last detail in this flow, and that is to animate in the pull down to close label in the top. Let's basically fade this in from 0 to 100% opacity, and this will happen in the end of the other movements. So there we come a long way, so let's see how all of this now looks together. Looks pretty nice. The cards pop out from the nav, making a pause and then expanding into full width with the right content. And now, as you can see, there's one thing that we missed doing before, and that is to remove the old navigation card in the bottom here. We want that to be empty. So let's go ahead and select our history composition, drag the quip whip to parent it to the null object, and then hide the reference card. And there you go, it's going to be empty in the background, and we have now animated the entire flow. So fantastic job. So the animation flow is now done and you're good to go, but if you want to stick around, I'm actually now going to show you just one small detail left, and that is how to morph this mask from a rounded corner into a straight corner when it goes full screen. So start by adding a new keyframe in the beginning and add 2 new points into this mask edge, and now we want to make a curve on all these 3. So the key adjustment will be in the corner point. I drag it in here. Also gonna zoom in here so I can see where I'm working at, and then placing it on the edge. But the curve is not big enough, so I'm gonna move this one up, and then the right one, I'm gonna move that to the right. And you can spend some time here to make it perfect. But this is basically the process, very similar to before when we increased the size, but now also the shape of the path. So here you will now see how it goes from a rounded corner into a straight corner, and then it continues with the previous animation we did before. So this marks the end of this design session and tutorial. I hope you liked this video and got some nice animation done. Let me know in the comments what you want to see next, and be sure to subscribe for more. Follow me on Instagram or any of my other social media channels at Wellgraph. Can't wait to share more, and I'll see you very soon again.